He thought good manners could hide bad behavior. The courtroom doors swung open, and in walked a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for success. Tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks, a calm smirk that said he'd never been told no in his life. Even the way he greeted the bailiff dripped with polite arrogance. "Good morning, sir," he said, as if courtesy could buy credibility. But the woman sitting across from him wasn't impressed. She wasn't here for charm. She was here for justice. This was his former personal assistant, a woman who'd managed his calendar, his life, and as it turned out, his lies. He owed her wages. Promised bonuses. A simple contract. But when she pressed for payment, he dismissed her like an inconvenience. "You'll get it soon," he'd said. "Be patient." Months passed. No paycheck. Now, in front of an experienced female judge with silver hair and eyes sharp enough to cut through charm, his smooth words were about to turn into evidence against him, because in her courtroom manners don't mask manipulation. Respect isn't measured by tone or tailoring, it's proven by truth. And by the time the verdict came down, this millionaire would learn the hard way that in front of this judge, you can't fake decency. Money buys appearances, manners buy moments. But truth decides everything. The hum of the courthouse carried that familiar tension, expectation, impatience, the faint buzz of whispers that always precedes a fall from grace. When the bailiff called the case, Parker versus Langford, everyone looked up. Jonathan Langford. The defendant rose from his chair with practiced poise. He was the picture of refinement, sleek hair, bespoke suit, and a calm, almost theatrical confidence. His presence filled the room like cologne, expensive but suffocating. Across from him sat Emily Parker, a woman in her late 20s, plain blouse, worn-out shoes, and eyes that told of exhaustion deeper than sleepless nights. She clutched a manila folder so tightly that her knuckles were white. Inside were months of emails, payslips, and broken promises. An experienced female judge with silver hair entered, her black robe flowing as she took her seat behind the bench. The chatter stopped instantly. Her reputation preceded her, sharp, disciplined, allergic to nonsense. "Miss Parker," the judge began, "you're suing Mr. Langford for unpaid wages and breach of contract totaling $7,200, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." Emily's voice was steady but soft. The judge turned to the defendant. "Mr. Langford?" He smiled politely. "Good morning, Your Honor. Yes, that's correct, though I believe there's been a misunderstanding." A murmur rippled through the room. "The misunderstanding defense classic. Proceed," the judge said. Jonathan folded his hands, projecting calm authority. "Ms. Parker worked for me for a few months. I compensated her generously, more than fairly. Unfortunately, her performance declined and her attitude became difficult. I decided to end her contract early." He paused, scanning the courtroom like a man auditioning for sympathy. "She's now claiming I owe her money for work she didn't complete." Emily's lips pressed together. She didn't interrupt, she didn't need to. She'd been preparing for this moment for months. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're saying she didn't fulfill her end of the contract?" "That's right, Your Honor." "Do you have documentation of any breach?" Jonathan hesitated. "Well, not exactly. It was more of a mutual understanding that things weren't working." The judge nodded slowly, pen tapping lightly against her notepad. "Mutual understanding, yet she's suing you. Interesting." A quiet chuckle spread through the gallery. Jonathan's jaw tightened. When it was Emily's turn to speak, her hands trembled slightly as she stood. "Your Honor," she said, voice steadying with every word. "I worked for Mr. Langford for 8 months as his personal assistant. I handled his scheduling, travel, and business correspondence. I often worked late, sometimes overnight. I was promised a $1,200 monthly bonus in addition to my base salary, but I never received it." She opened her folder and began passing documents to the bailiff. "These are my pay stubs, bank transfers, and the employment contract with his signature. I also have emails confirming the bonus arrangement." The judge looked through the documents, her eyes scanning quickly but intently. "Mr. Langford, these look legitimate." Jonathan's smile thinned. I don't recall agreeing to that bonus structure." Emily didn't flinch. "I printed the email where you did, Your Honor. The one where you wrote, 'You've been a star, let's make it worth your while.'" The judge's eyebrow arched ever so slightly. "Do you have that email, Ms. Parker?" "Yes, ma'am. Page 3. The judge turned the page, reading silently. Her expression shifted, slight but noticeable. Then softly she said, Mr. Langford, is this your email address? He adjusted his tie. Yes, but I don't, it says, and I quote, she interrupted. You'll get the full bonus this month. Emily, consider it a token of appreciation. Signed, Jonathan Langford. Jonathan's silence was deafening. The judge looked up, eyes sharp and deliberate. Mr. Langford, did you make this promise? He cleared his throat. It was a friendly remark, not a contractual commitment. The judge leaned forward. You were her employer. Every written promise about compensation is enforceable. Whether you typed it with formality or with flattery is irrelevant. You made a commitment. Emily's eyes welled, but she blinked it back. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Your Honor, I've always treated Ms. Parker with respect. I believe she's exaggerating because she feels slighted. The judge's gaze sharpened. Respect isn't about how you speak, Mr. Langford. It's about how you act. You can sir and ma'am your way through life, but if you don't honor your word, your manners are meaningless. The courtroom went silent. Jonathan's smile faltered. Emily sat down, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected the judge to defend her so directly. For months, she'd lived in fear of being dismissed again, talked over, diminished, made to feel small by a man who used charm like a weapon. But here, under the cold lights of the courtroom, her truth was finally being heard. Jonathan shifted in his seat, glancing toward his assistant at the back of the room. The woman avoided his gaze. He realized suddenly that he'd underestimated the power of evidence and overestimated the power of eloquence. The judge closed the folder gently. We'll continue after recess, she said. But Mr. Langford, I suggest you use this break to think very carefully about how you want to proceed. Her tone wasn't angry. It was surgical, controlled. The kind of tone that stripped ego from even the most polished. Jonathan nodded stiffly, muttering, Yes, Your Honor. As the judge exited the room, the bailiff called, All rise. The room stood, but Jonathan didn't feel tall anymore. He felt small. Outside the courtroom, Emily stood by the vending machines, hands trembling as she tore open a granola bar she wasn't hungry for. A stranger passed her and whispered, Good for you. She smiled faintly. It was the first time she'd heard those words in a long, long time. Meanwhile, Jonathan leaned against the wall near the exit, phone pressed to his ear. She's lying, he hissed. It's a misunderstanding, but even as he said it, his reflection in the glass door looked back at him, and for the first time, he didn't believe his own story. Because behind that reflection, he could still hear the judge's voice echoing in his mind. You can't fake decency. And deep down, Jonathan Langford knew she was right. The courtroom air had changed. The kind of silence that followed wasn't calm. It was electric, expectant. The kind that buzzed with something waiting to snap. When the bailiff called everyone back after recess, Jonathan Langford looked different. The charm was still there, perfect posture, immaculate suit, but the easy confidence had cracked at the edges. His hands twitched when he adjusted his tie. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The experienced female judge took her seat again, composed as ever. Let's continue, she said, voice steady as polished steel. Mr. Langford, before the break, you claimed this issue stemmed from a misunderstanding. Have you had time to reconsider your statement? Jonathan cleared his throat. I have, Your Honor. And while I maintain that I treated Ms. Parker with respect, Stop, she said softly. Let's talk about respect. The courtroom stilled. You said earlier that you were generous, that you compensated her fairly. Let's see if that's true. She gestured to the bailiff, who handed her a new document. Ms. Parker, you submitted a time log? Emily nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I kept a record of all hours worked, days, nights, weekends. I even noted business travel. The judge flipped through the pages, eyes darting like a hawk scanning for movement. Mr. Langford, do you dispute these hours? He hesitated. I don't recall asking her to work that much. Emily spoke up, quietly but firmly. You didn't ask. You expected? The judge's pen paused mid-note. Explain that. Emily looked down, steadying herself. Mr. Langford would message me at all hours. 2 a.m., 4 a.m., about flight changes, contracts, restaurant reservations. He said, You're part of the lifestyle now, Emily. Laughter rippled faintly from the gallery, quickly silenced by a single look from the judge. Emily continued. At first I was proud to keep up. I thought it meant I was indispensable. But after the second month, I realized I wasn't being treated like an employee. I was being treated like property. Jonathan leaned forward. That's absurd, the judge raised her hand. You'll get your turn, Mr. Langford. She turned back to Emily. Continue. Emily's voice steadied, gathering strength. When I brought up overtime, he laughed. Said I should be grateful just to be in his circle. That people would kill for the chance to work for him. The judge's expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened slightly. And when you pressed for payment? He stopped responding, Emily said. I'd send emails. I'd text. Nothing. Then I got locked out of the work account one morning. No warning, no notice. Just gone. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, arms folded, wearing that same calm smirk. It's called termination, Your Honor. Happens every day. The judge's pen clicked once, a sharp sound that sliced the tension like a scalpel. Termination, yes, but unpaid wages, illegal. And arrogance? Her gaze met his. That's just unwise. The cracks begin. The judge turned her attention to Jonathan's counsel table. Mr. Langford, you presented no written termination notice, no HR record, no proof of misconduct. Are you claiming verbal justification? Jonathan's smile faltered. I believed it was implied. Implied? The judge repeated the word like it tasted bad. You thought firing someone without cause or compensation was implied? He opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. You're a businessman, correct? Yes. Then you should understand contracts, commitments, paperwork. She tapped Emily's file. Ms. Parker brought receipts. You brought excuses. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratch of her pen. Jonathan swallowed hard. With respect, Your Honor, I'm not a villain. I've helped dozens of employees succeed. I mentor, I donate. The judge looked up sharply. Charity doesn't erase exploitation, Mr. Langford. It only makes hypocrisy look generous. The line hit the room like thunder. Even the court reporter paused for half a beat before continuing to type. The phone evidence Emily's attorney, a quiet but meticulous man named Jacobs, stood. Your Honor, permission to present a new exhibit. Text messages between Ms. Parker and Mr. Langford. Proceed, the judge said. A moment later, enlarged prints appeared on the court screen. The texts were unmistakably Jonathan's, Jonathan Langford. Need the presentation by sunrise. Emily Parker. I've been up 18 hours already. I'll have it in 2. Jonathan Langford. Good. Don't make me regret being generous. The judge's eyebrow lifted. You sent these messages, Mr. Langford? He shifted in his seat. They're out of context. Context don't make me regret being generous sound any better, she replied. The audience stifled gasps. Jacobs continued. And here, Your Honor, a message from Ms. Parker asking for her overdue pay. Emily Parker. Hi, Jonathan, it's been 3 weeks since payroll. Could you please confirm payment? Jonathan Langford. Relax. You'll get it when I have time to process it. The judge's pen froze mid-air. When you have time to process it, she repeated. Jonathan tried to regain footing. It was late due to business cash flow. Nothing more. Mr. Langford, she said slowly, you're a millionaire. I manage multiple accounts. Then you should have managed this one, she cut in, the exposure. The judge set down her pen, folding her hands. Let me tell you something I've learned in this courtroom, she began. Her voice was calm, but carried a current of authority that filled every corner. People like you believe politeness is morality. You smile, you apologize, you say please and thank you, and you think that covers cruelty. But real respect isn't how softly you speak. It's how fairly you treat the people who can't say no to you. Jonathan's throat went dry. You made this woman work without pay, ignored her requests, then fired her without warning. You used charm to cover neglect, and when she stood up for herself, you called her difficult. That's not professionalism. That's manipulation. Every word landed like a verdict before the verdict. Jonathan's hands clenched on the table, the confident mask peeling away inch by inch. The judge leaned forward. You said earlier that you've helped people succeed. I believe that, because men like you always help the ones who already have power. It's easy to be generous when you're surrounded by mirrors. But Ms. Parker? She pointed gently. She's not a mirror. She's a reminder. That's why you fired her. The silence in the room grew heavy, nearly sacred. The truth breaks. Jonathan inhaled, exhaled, then finally said, "You're right." Gasps broke out across the courtroom. Emily blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. He looked down, shaking his head. "You're right, Your Honor. I thought I could fix this quietly. I didn't want it to get this far. But I did promise her that bonus. I did delay her pay, and when she pushed back, I took it personally." The judge didn't speak. She waited. "I thought being polite made me decent," he continued, "but it just made me cowardly. I didn't want confrontation, so I avoided it, and that avoidance turned into disrespect." The judge finally nodded. "Accountability begins when excuses end, Mr. Langford, remember that." She looked at Emily. "Ms. Parker, you've handled this with patience and composure. You don't owe this man your gratitude, but you've earned this court's respect." Emily nodded, tears threatening but never falling. "Thank you, Your Honor." The break point. The judge looked back at Jonathan. "You'll have one more opportunity to present mitigating evidence before I rule. I suggest you use it to prove not just that you have money, but that you have conscience." "Yes, Your Honor," he said quietly. The gavel struck once. "Court will reconvene tomorrow morning." As the room emptied, Jonathan stayed seated. The performance was over. All that remained was the reckoning. He glanced across the aisle. Emily gathered her things without a word, her movements deliberate, her posture unbroken, and for the first time, Jonathan saw her not as an employee, not as a nuisance, but as someone who'd refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. He envied that courage, because no amount of manners could mask what he saw in her. Now, integrity. And integrity, he realized, was the one thing his money could never buy. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the courthouse windows like shards of truth, slicing through dust and pretense alike. The room felt different now, heavier, quieter, waiting. Jonathan Langford entered alone. His assistant wasn't with him this time. His lawyer had advised him to keep quiet, to let the documents speak for themselves. But the problem was, the documents had spoken and they didn't lie. Across the aisle, Emily Parker sat at the plaintiff's table, calm but weary. The exhaustion from months of being ignored had finally settled into something steadier. Resolve. When the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise," everyone stood. The experienced female judge walked in, black robe swaying, silver hair glinting like judgment-made flesh. She looked neither angry nor pleased, just ready. "Please be seated," she said, and the sound of chairs sliding echoed through the room like a countdown. The calm before the verdict. The judge looked over her notes, flipping pages deliberately. Every turn was a warning, slow, methodical, inescapable. "Yesterday," she began, "we heard extensive testimony from both parties. Today we're going to deal with something far simpler. Truth." Her gaze cut toward Jonathan. "Mr. Langford, you were given an opportunity to present mitigating evidence. You have the floor." Jonathan stood, clasping his hands behind his back. His voice, once smooth as silk, carried an unfamiliar strain. "Your Honor, I don't deny that I made mistakes. I handled things poorly and I let pride get in the way of decency. But I didn't intend to harm Ms. Parker. I thought I was managing a business matter, not breaking someone's trust." The judge tilted her head slightly. "You thought, but you didn't check. You assumed that because you meant no harm, there was none. That's not management, Mr. Langford, that's negligence." Jonathan nodded. "I understand that now. Do you?" she asked, leaning forward. "Because understanding doesn't count until it changes behavior." Her words hung in the air. Sharp and final, evidence becomes judgment. The judge turned toward Emily. "Ms. Parker, I've reviewed every document you provided. Your records are thorough, your contract binding, and your testimony consistent. You were, by all evidence, an exemplary employee." Emily nodded, trying not to cry. The judge continued, "Mr. Langford's claims of poor performance are unsupported. His communication was dismissive at best, manipulative at worst." She paused, looking directly at him. "In this court, wealth does not equal worth. Titles don't grant moral credit. You treated responsibility like a luxury, something you could afford to ignore." Jonathan's eyes fell to the floor. His cufflinks caught the light, but the gleam seemed hollow now. The judge leaned back. "I've seen defendants like you before, men who believe good manners can hide bad choices. They hold doors, say please, thank you, and think that civility absolves them. But the law doesn't measure politeness, Mr. Langford. It measures principle. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The final cross. "Before I issue judgment," she said, "I have one question." Jonathan looked up. "Do you think Ms. Parker deserved to be treated the way you treated her?" He hesitated, his throat working to find words that wouldn't come. "No," he finally whispered. The judge nodded once. "That's the first honest answer I've heard from you." She turned the page in her notebook, her tone steady and final. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Parker. Judgment for unpaid wages and promised bonuses totaling $7,200, plus damages in the amount of $3,000 for breach of contract and undue stress. Payment is due within 30 days. The gavel fell. Once, sharp, decisive. Emily gasped quietly, hand to her mouth. Jonathan closed his eyes, a single nod acknowledging what he couldn't fight anymore. The truth had spoken, and it spoke clearly. The echo of decency. The judge wasn't finished. She folded her hands, voice softening slightly. "Mr. Langford, I hope this stays with you longer than the financial penalty. You can rebuild money. You can't rebuild character once it's known to be hollow." She looked to Emily next. "And Miss Parker, don't mistake this for revenge. It's restoration. You lost time, peace, and dignity. Take this as proof that integrity may struggle, but it never loses." Emily nodded, unable to speak. "Court is adjourned," the judge said, striking the gavel one last time. The echo lingered. Not loud, not angry, just final. The moment. After, when the room emptied, Jonathan remained seated. The reporters were gone, the murmurs faded. Just him, the judge's words replaying in his mind. Wealth does not equal worth. He reached into his pocket and unclasped his gold cufflinks, symbols of a persona that had just crumbled. He placed them on the table as if shedding a skin he no longer wanted to wear. Across the room, Emily gathered her papers. She paused by the door, looked back at him once, and said quietly, "You don't have to be perfect, Mr. Langford, just honest." He met her gaze, humbled. "I'm learning," she nodded. "Then that's something," and with that she walked out, leaving him in the silence he'd earned and maybe needed. The judge's reflection in her chambers later. The experienced female judge sipped coffee from a worn mug. Her clerk entered quietly. "Rough one today," he said. She smiled faintly. "They're all rough until someone listens." "Do you think he'll change?" the clerk asked. The judge leaned back, eyes distant. "Maybe. The truth only works if you let it in. But I think he heard it, and that's enough." She glanced out the window at the city skyline. The courtroom doesn't fix people. It shows them who they are. Whether they do something about it, that's on them. The clerk nodded and left. The judge sat alone a moment longer, then whispered to herself, "Justice isn't just punishment, it's the mirror they can't escape." A glimmer of redemption. Weeks later, Jonathan wrote a letter. Not through an assistant. Not through his lawyer. "By hand, Emily, you deserved more than apologies, but I hope this one reaches you anyway. I was wrong. About money, about power, about people. Thank you for standing your ground. You reminded me that respect isn't given by title. It's earned by truth. Sincerely, Jonathan." He didn't send it right away. He kept it on his desk beside the cufflinks he'd never wear again, as a reminder of the day good manners failed, and honesty began. The courthouse steps gleamed beneath the morning sun. Reporters had moved on to the next scandal, and the world outside no longer cared about Parker v. Langford. But inside the lives of those two people, the echo of that gavel still lingered. Jonathan Langford stood at the edge of the plaza, hands in his pockets, watching the doors swing shut behind the last departing attorney. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't have an audience. No cameras, no admirers, no assistants pretending to laugh at his jokes. Just the quiet sound of consequence. He thought about the judge's words, every one of them landing harder now that the noise had faded. You can rebuild money. You can't rebuild character once it's known to be hollow. The words followed him all the way home. A mirror in silence. His penthouse, once his sanctuary, now felt like a museum to his old self. Every polished surface reflected a man he didn't quite recognize anymore. The decor screamed wealth, but the air whispered emptiness. He walked past the grand piano he never played, the abstract art he couldn't name, and the trophies that commemorated business deals, not decency. Each item, once proof of success, now looked like evidence. He poured a drink but stopped halfway. He didn't want to drown the sound of his thoughts anymore. For weeks he'd believed this case would pass. Just another inconvenience, a misunderstanding to be managed. But the courtroom hadn't given him a punishment. It had given him a mirror. And now there was no escaping it. He sat at his desk and opened a blank document. Not a legal statement, not a PR release, just a letter to himself. Dear Jonathan, you thought being polite was enough. You thought saying please and thank you made you good. It didn't. You used charm to avoid honesty, and that's worse than cruelty. Because cruelty at least admits what it is. Start over. Learn the difference between being nice and being kind. He saved it, printed it, framed it. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He picked up the phone himself. No assistant. No filter. Ms. Parker, he said when Emily answered. His voice trembled slightly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want you to know. I paid everything. The interest, too. And I donated to the Women in Business Legal Fund. It's not penance. It's a start. There was a pause. Then Emily's voice came softly through the line. Thank you, Jonathan. That's more than I expected, he exhaled. You deserved more than I gave. You can't fix the past, she said gently. But you can stop repeating it, he smiled faintly. I intend to. When they hung up, Jonathan realized something profound. He finally meant what he said. Emily's rise for Emily. Life after the trial didn't become easier. It became clearer. The judgment money wasn't a windfall. It was a foundation. She used it to pay debts, update her resume, and open her small consultancy, Parker Administrative Solutions. Her motto was simple. Integrity works over time. She started small, freelance clients, startups, nonprofits. But word spread fast. People trusted her because she was consistent, professional, fair, and, most importantly, unafraid to set boundaries. 6 months later, she hired her first employee, a single mother named Tara who'd just lost her job at a marketing firm. On her first day, Tara apologized nervously for needing to leave early to pick up her son. Emily smiled and said, Family comes first, always. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't just rebuilding her career. She was rewriting the rules of respect she'd once begged for. The judge's perspective. In her chambers, the experienced female judge sat behind her desk, reading through a new case file. Different names, different details, but the same story. A boss who thought courtesy could conceal exploitation. She sighed, sipping her tea. Her clerk entered, holding an envelope. This came for you, Judge. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Your Honor, you told me the courtroom doesn't fix people. It shows them who they are. You were right. I've been learning who I am ever since. Thank you for making me face myself. Jaylee's smile touched her lips. She placed the note beside another envelope. One she'd received months before, signed by EP, thanking her for believing that truth mattered. She leaned back, staring at both letters side by side. One from a man stripped of privilege. One from a woman restored by justice. 2 lives on opposite ends of the same lesson. Justice served, she whispered. Not just in court, but in conscience. The ripple effect, the clip of the trial, Jonathan's admission, the judge's sharp words, Emily's quiet strength, had gone viral long after the case closed. Millions watched. Millions commented. Proof that decency beats ego. Judge levels a millionaire with one sentence. Kindness isn't weakness. This case proves it. But beneath the viral headlines, something deeper stirred. Small business owners shared stories of standing up to unpaid clients. Assistants demanded overdue wages. A movement of accountability bloomed from a single courtroom exchange. And Jonathan? He stayed quiet. No interviews. No rebuttals. Instead, he began mentoring young entrepreneurs. Not about money, but about ethics. At his first talk, he stood before a group of fresh graduates wearing no watch, no tailored suit, just a plain shirt and rolled sleeves. Here's what I learned, he told them. Being polite is easy. Being principled is hard, but only one of those will let you sleep at night. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was genuine. Closure. Year later, Emily walked into a corporate office, not as an assistant, but as a consultant. The company had hired her to audit their employee relations systems. The HR director shook her hand. We've heard good things, he said. As she looked around the boardroom, she caught sight of a plaque on the wall. Integrity is the foundation of leadership. She smiled. That's true, she said softly, thinking of the woman in the black robe whose words had changed her life. Later that evening, she walked past the courthouse on her way home. The windows glowed gold in the setting sun. She stopped for a moment, watching the light fade across the marble facade. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass doors. Steady, assured, unbroken, she whispered, "Thank you. Not to anyone in particular, but to the journey itself." Then she turned and walked away, her steps echoing softly on the pavement. The man who learned to listen, Jonathan Langford's story, didn't make headlines again. He didn't need it to. He still ran his businesses, but differently now, fewer meetings, more mentorship. He started a foundation that funded workplace ethics education. It didn't carry his name. That was the point. Occasionally, he'd drive past the courthouse, glance at its steps, and feel something that wasn't guilt anymore, it was gratitude. He never spoke to Emily again, but he didn't need to. Some apologies live quietly, through better choices. And each time he saw an employee's paycheck processed on time, each thank you he sent without needing to sound polished, he knew. He'd finally learned the difference between image and integrity. The final balance in a quiet office high above the city. The judge wrote her end-of-year reflections. Another year, another ledger of lies and lessons. But every so often, a case reminds me that justice is more than retribution. It's revelation. Manners fade. Apologies age, but truth it endures. And when it finally meets accountability, the world becomes a little fairer, one gavel at a time. She placed her pen down, gazing at the skyline. The sun dipped low, painting the courthouse in hues of fire and forgiveness. And as the light faded, she whispered the words that had become her quiet creed. Millionaire manners don't matter. Proof is in how you treat people when no one's watching. The world outside moved on, but the truth, her kind of truth, stayed behind, echoing through the empty courtroom like a promise kept.